Hello teachers, welcome to our video on ARK, Activating Relevant Knowledge. As we discussed in our overview video, academic learning time is going to be what we are shooting for in each and every lesson. In every lesson we teach, all day, every day, we want to make sure students know and understand the objective, are actively manipulating the content, and are being successful 75 to 95% of the time. The way we're going to make sure that happens is we are going to plan our lessons using the core instructional model. In this video, we're going to be focusing on this first piece of the core instructional model, which is ARK, Activate, Assess, and Augment Relevant Knowledge. When we look at our lesson planning template, this is where ARK lives. It's the thing that we do at the beginning of every single lesson. And as you probably recall, ARK and ISS, those are the bookends holding those gradual release pieces in place. We are going to start every lesson identifying what our students already know about the topic that we are going to be teaching. What we know about the brain is that no new learning takes place unless it is hooked into something old. So by activating our students' relevant knowledge, we help them to start thinking about what they already know about the topic we're going to be teaching. That way, when we start giving them new information, they will be able to hook it right into the information that they are already familiar with. When you're getting ready to plan a lesson, you can use our thinking frame to ask yourself some questions when you want to plan how you might activate your students' relevant knowledge. So let's zoom in and see what these questions are. I'm going to give you a moment to read these bullet points here on the screen. I'm going to point out a few things that may have stood out to you already. We notice here that we say we're going to activate their relevant knowledge, and we might need to augment their relevant knowledge. And ARK can actually stand for activate, assess, and augment their relevant knowledge. So let's get some clarification around what exactly do we mean by that. When might it be time to augment relevant knowledge? Well, I want you to imagine that you started off your lesson, let's say you're teaching math, and you asked your students, hey guys, tell your partner, how do we multiply fractions? Everybody talk about multiplying fractions. What are the steps we take? You let them have their partner conversations, and then you call on a pair to share what they talked about, and the information they shared is not correct. So obviously, we're going to need to make some corrections before we can move on into the lesson. If we start off and our relevant knowledge is not what it needs to be, we may need to correct that before we move on into the lesson. Sometimes, though, it may be possible for you to hear, they are not quite on the right track, but you know that as you move through your lesson, your students are going to have that aha moment, and so you let it stand. You say, that is not quite the right answer, but as we move through our lesson, I want you to think about why that answer that you just gave me isn't quite what we need. So you're not giving them the correct answer, but they know, I need to listen for something so I can figure out where I might have gone awry. As we go back into our thinking frames, there's something else you might have noticed, and that is the word objective standing out multiple times, as well as our standards being referenced. So yes, during the time that we activate relevant knowledge, this is also the time that we are going to be letting our students know what the lesson objective is. Take a moment and read this quote. When we know what we want to accomplish, then we can accomplish it. If our students don't know the purpose of a lesson, they are less likely to get the benefits of that lesson. So starting off our lesson by letting them know the objective, this is going to cause their brains to light up in the areas that already know something about that particular objective, and it's going to be able to store that information longer. So what do we mean by lesson objectives? Take a moment and read this information on the screen. So the key thing here is these measurable terms. How will we know that they are successful? Well, we're going to talk about that in just a second. So an effective objective is going to do these four things. It's going to focus students on their learning goal. It's going to be specific but flexible. It's going to connect to what they already know and to what they will be learning. And it's going to kind of provide a hook. It's going to connect with their interests. An effective learning objective would answer these two questions. What do I want students to know and be able to do when the lesson is over? And how will I know if they can do it? So what are some characteristics of an effective learning objective? Well, it's going to tell students what they need to be able to do, something that's observable. It's going to have one of those Bloom's action verbs in there so that I can know this is what I'm going to be looking for. It's going to describe how well the learner is going to perform. In other words, it's going to be measurable. There's going to be a product that they are going to create or a measurable action that I can observe. And key here, it needs to be reviewed with the students. Here is our formula: skill plus content plus observable evidence. That's going to give me a good objective. So what are some examples? Well, here on the screen you can see students will be able to write in their learning logs how the main character solved his problem or solved the conflict in the story. Or students will be able to multiply two-digit numbers to solve a word problem. We have a skill in our content area and we have some observable evidence. Of course, we can always go back to our Bloom's words to remind ourselves what those verbs might be. But now let's look at what really do we mean when we say activate relevant knowledge. What does it really look like? Well, let me give you some examples. Let's start with a science lesson. We know that activating relevant knowledge is going to be helping our students to think about what do they already know about a certain topic. So in my science lesson in the beginning, I might say, remind your partner of the parts of a cell that we learned about yesterday. And you can see my little asterisk here. It stands for a partner conversations. And then I'm going to call on a few people to share whole class. But I want everyone to answer this question. I don't really want just one person to raise their hand and answer because I can't assume that everyone is listening. So partnering is going to give me a more likely chance of getting everyone involved in answering this question. So remind your partner the parts of the cell that we learned about yesterday. I pause, I listen as they have those partner conversations, and then I say, yeah, so-and-so, tell us what you and your partner talked about. Absolutely, and so-and-so, tell us what you guys talked about. Awesome. Call on a few different people to share. Then you tell your students, today we're going to learn more about the jobs of each of these cell parts, and this is what I'm going to read my objective to my students. What about in a math lesson? Hey guys, welcome to class. I want you to work this problem that I have written on the board on your own and then tell your partner how you find the answer to this problem. You let them work it, you let them have their partner conversations, you listen in as they're partnering to see how they're doing, and then you can give them some feedback as they're going. Then you're going to say, yeah, today we're going to practice more of these problems. Let's read our objective together. Finally, what about a social studies objective, a social studies ARK? Okay, guys, yesterday we talked about the myth of manifest destiny. Tell your partner, why are we referring to manifest destiny as a myth? Now I'm going to be listening for my students to see if they remember those conversations we had yesterday, if they've internalized some of those reasons and can put them into their own words. Afterwards, if they didn't, I'm going to make some clarifications and then say, yeah, today we're going to learn more about westward expansion and its effects. Let's look at the objective that I have posted here on the board. I want you to keep these three examples in mind because when it comes time to talk about ISS, we're going to come back to these three examples and I'm going to give you an example of what an ISS might be for these lessons that we just set up. So we've identified what do you already know about these various topics, and in the ISS we're going to ask our students to identify what they learned that expanded their knowledge on those topics. So once again, going into our thinking frame, zeroing in on those questions that we can ask ourselves when we are creating the opening part of our lesson. What academic standards are we using? What's the objective? How will I know that my students are meeting the objective? How can I gauge when students already know what they already know related to the lesson? How am I going to activate their relevant knowledge? And where might I need to augment that knowledge? And just a reminder that we're doing all this because we know that we are the biggest factor affecting student achievement in our classroom. The next video you're going to watch is about TIP, teacher input. Thank you so much for your time.